Good morning, everybody. Thanks for being here. Episode 5, moving right along. Going to be another one of my favorites. Over the years of collecting all these, I would say, the American Southwest is probably the most densely populated. The eastern coast of America has papers going back, into the mid 1700s, even earlier, but not that the easiest to find in the archives. But yeah, this is a dense one. I really had to pick and choose. Just like California, I'm probably only going to be presenting like a quarter of what I have, maybe even a little bit less, just because some of these we're going to be reading from full page articles. It's going to take a little more time, but it's worth it because, yeah, they're just amazing. Before we get too far, how do I sound? Last time I got comments that I was too quiet. Am I too quiet? I always seem like my volume's okay, but let's get the microphone a little closer to my face. Okay. Make sure everything's looking all right. Okay. So where do we start? Yeah. Thanks for being here. Number one, I wouldn't keep doing this stuff if it wasn't for all you guys being here. And every week it gets better and better. Make sure to stay tuned after this broadcast. I'll be posting the next poll for episode 6. It'll be between Utah and Nevada. I have a feeling that Utah will win. I could be wrong. But if that's the case, and episode 6 is on Utah, we'll be canceling the poll for week 7 and not skipping Nevada, just because I want to kind of keep it in that region. So, but yeah, after this broadcast, make sure to vote. Pick which one you want. AZ is a mystical place. Please do Utah. Yeah, Utah as well is. I have hundreds of articles on Utah. I've mentioned this many times before. My wife's from there. It's one of my favorite places in the world. Considered moving there several times. Amazing place. In the entire state is amazing. You could just wander outside of any city in Utah and feel like you're on a different planet. It's pretty amazing. And the history there is really, really crazy. I'm going to be doing another preview video. So hopefully as soon as the poll's done, I'll get the preview video out. I want to have those out by Thursday or Friday at the latest every week. Everyone seemed to really enjoy that. I'll be picking like one of my favorite full page articles. It'll be 15 to 20 minutes. The average watch time is 10 minutes. So maybe that's the sweet spot, but who knows? Just pick the ones I like. But yeah, thanks again for being here, everybody. I really appreciate it. Getting up at 4 a.m. and taking care of everybody and getting the animals all sorted, getting my brain functioning in somewhat of an appropriate manner. My reading tends to lack a little bit this early in the morning, so I appreciate everybody's patience. Yeah, why don't we dive right in, because I know I'm not going to have enough time to read all these. So yeah, let's get the screen share going. All right. So yeah, because I have so many, I'm not going to share as many pictures as I did last time. You can check me out on Twitter. It'll be in the description. And yeah, Joe Cool's just linked it there. You don't need an account. You can just click the link and view my posts. Having Twitter is really great, and subscribing to me is really great because when you subscribe, you can click the microphone, the magnifying glass icon, and you can search my archive for keywords. Your state name, giants, mounds, petrified, whatever you want, and you'll get all my articles with those keywords. And with approaching 8,000 posts, there is a lot to dig through. And it's free. So I would highly recommend it. I know a lot of people complain. I prefer Twitter to Instagram. It has some functions and the thread stuff that helps me organize for stuff like this. Again, I never planned to do presentations, but it helped me organize my brain. And when I would get into a discussion with somebody in the physical or online in some kind of format where I wanted to present my information or stuff that popped into my head, I was easily able to search my archive. So I've always loved that. It has features that make it stand out from other social medias out there. But yeah, so everyone can see my screen. Yeah, thanks, Brian. You should. Yeah, and I get it. If you don't want to download it, no problem. But you're missing out, really, because it's free and you can search my archive for whatever you want. I get people all the time telling me that they want to hear about this or they want to hear about that. And I get people emailing me all the time asking me for information on something specific. And I just have to just create an account and use the search tool and you'll find plenty to keep you busy. But yeah, so the first one I'm going to first article I'm going to jump into is going to be a good one. And then we'll kind of bounce around. The main focus of this show is going to be a little bit different than Arizona or than California, but not really. Similarities again existing between Arizona and all the previous states. Why I've tried to keep the border to border segment of the show together is because there are so many similarities here, and I'm trying to build a picture or narrative of what happened here on the West Coast. It's predominantly why I chose to start on the West and move east. Arizona, like California, Oregon, Alaska, and Washington, was devastated by one or two or three separate events. One was a flood, one was a volcanic event, one was an earthquake, and it seems like perhaps worked into that one of those three events or its own event was some kind of conflagration event. I would say probably an electrical event. You guys remember from eastern Washington through eastern Oregon down through the middle southern part of California, and now here into Arizona, we've been dealing with gigantic petrifactions. And Arizona is no different. Unlike Oregon, where a lot of it was saved and it was parked, miners got to Arizona and completely harvested. But Arizona had standing petrified forests. Okay, still standing, still above ground, completely intact, full trees, full limbs, full everything. And some of the trees were turned into different types of crystals. Some trees were completely opals, were completely transformed into opals. This is what I was mentioning when I was talking about kind of the Avatar reference that I've been making a few times throughout these shows, is that the trees or organic life, when exposed to high levels of electricity, plasma, they can literally crystallize and become all kinds of things. Remember, they were finding petrified gigantic men when they were doing the hydraulic mining in California that had been completely turned into silver and gold and many other quartz-like minerals. And another thing that I'm going to touch on, but I'm not going to spend too much time here. It's going to be its completely own series, radium. Once we get to Colorado, I won't I'll spend more time on radium because that's one of the hot spots, but they were finding radium in the petrified trees. Now, radium is incredibly important. It's basically endless energy. It's like little mini suns. It gives off energy without losing weight. Basically, eternal energy. Its byproduct is helium, which is incredible. Helium was discovered after radium was discovered by the same person that discovered radium. She was an absolute genius. She discovered like 20 other elements, and it all spawned from radium. And I've hypothesized that the scarab beetle, the symbol of it's an alchemical symbol, comes from Egypt, comes from many places, but the desert areas. It was a symbol that was very popular here in the American Southwest. Although the scarab beetle today is incredibly rare, um, the archaeological record shows that there were many, many, many of them. I've hypothesized that the scarab beetle is an alchemical symbol for radium. That's why you often see the sun disk in the wings shown with radium. When the certain beetles fly, just like bees, they don't actually they create a kind of a vibratory hover. They kind of disappear from gravity, and they were using radium, I believe, in previous ages. Um, they were using the helium to hold ships in the air, and they were using the radium as engines and perpetual engines. That was a long roundabout way of getting into the articles, yeah, but it's really interesting. The petrifactions, it's really important. Just like California and Oregon, they had Pompeii type cities here in Arizona. People frozen in place, doing household chores, just, you know. And Phoenix, the city name is purposeful. Phoenix was built on top of an ancient city where they found several buildings, several masonry buildings, 4 stories or more in height. And you'll find almost all Arizona cities are built on top of ancient cities. One of the articles we'll touch on is Prescott, Arizona. They were drilling foundations, and at 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 feet, they were finding skeletons, pottery, bricks, all kinds of stuff. And yeah, so again, if you're not following me on Twitter, you should be. I'm going to show you a little bit of what I do every week before my show, leading up to the show. It's a lot of work. I put in, probably 10 or more hours just in recategorizing and posting. And then I make AI images for all of my posts. So I know a lot of you listeners out there, you already know this, but anyone that's new, I go back through and I pick my favorites, ones that we're going to talk about. We may not have time to cover them all, but that's the beauty again of Twitter, and why I try to create a kind of script is it allows people to go back through. They can get more information. They can look up the articles themselves, look at the images. I just type in a quote from the text, and I use Midjourney, and it makes these amazing images. I think images are really great, especially in today's age. The images really help people. I'm a visual learner too, so it's made a world of difference for me. But then I make a what's called a thread. And again, if you don't know Twitter, a thread is just a long post where everything's categorized together. So here's my episode with the YouTube link. This will be one of the main posts on my channel right now. And then we're going to go through these categorically, just one by one, pretty much. And, as time permits, this one right here, a wonderful ethnological discovery. This will be the second one reread after the first one I've already selected here. And everything's here. And again, this is less than 25% of what I have on Arizona. I would say even less than that. But so, yeah, I've rambled now for however long, 15 minutes. 60 people in the chat really means a lot. It's amazing. 5 a.m. Everyone's here. It's incredible. It's a great feeling. So yeah, we'll go back down here. Be ready to select my second talk, which you guys are going to love this one. I've read it before, but it's been a very long time. And I've read this one before. Also, it's been a very long time. So let's jump right in. First inhabitants of America, giants in physique, fought wild beasts in deadly combat 25,000 or 50,000 years ago. DC paper from 1922. Here's just the title page. Weird relics show powerful humans. Warrior Emperor Tigrinus tomb reveals that red-headed people in all history dwelt. All history dwelt in America, and that strange basket makers of prehistoric Utah were kindreds to these people. And this is covering 3 separate locations, and this is why I wanted just to touch on the title page here. They found 3 ruins. They found one in Utah, they found one in Arizona, and they found one in New Mexico. And why this is important is because they mummified turkeys. They made the same type of weapons. They had a percentage of the tribe that was redheaded. Paul Cook, thanks for being here, man. Means a lot. Appreciate you. So what's really interesting about this tribe is that most of the tribe had black hair and were very, very, very small, like 4 feet or less. Okay. So we're dealing with the pygmies again, the same pygmies that were popping up in the La Brea tar pits. And if you remember the episode, for the California episode, I showed you the map from the 1500s that had Canada labeled as the Canaan Desert and had the southwestern part of America labeled as pygmies, and the middle part below the Great Lakes, which weren't actually there yet, was labeled as Cathay. Really important. We'll touch on that as we get farther east in this series. But the American Southwest was the land of the pygmies. And the basket makers, the cliff dwellers, the subterranean people were often pygmy people. And what is really interesting is their nobles or their priests and their warriors both were redheaded, what they call giants. They averaged mid sixes, some into the 7 feet, but mid sixes was common. Now, the rest of this article is going to focus on one dig in New Mexico. So when we get to New Mexico, we'll go farther into this. But I wanted just to touch on this because they found 3 separate places, and one of them was in Arizona. And they're certain it's the same tribe of people because they had a warrior class of giant redheaded men, but they were all living together in communal places. If we get into Nevada in the next 2 weeks, which we will in the next 2 weeks, if we get into next week, we're going to talk about Lovelock Cave, the redheaded giants that lived in the subterranean worlds of the American Southwest. Yeah, but really incredible, important thing to think about. This author goes as far as to say that all the monuments here are far older than Egypt, and that Egypt gets its roots from the American Southwest. And I tend to agree with him. The animal record and the plant record all trace their roots here to America, the Americas. I'm sorry, Mexico, South America. This is one land. And yeah, the redheaded priest warrior class is really interesting because often you hear subjugation and stuff like this, but these people were all living together. There was no separation, and they loved their king. So this is kind of a teaser for when we get to New Mexico. But it's important because we'll touch on a little bit of stuff like this as we get more into the Arizona articles. And people today, it's easy to get caught up on the Aboriginals and the Native Americans and the lore of these things and the atrocities that happened here, which many things did, horrible things did. But you have to understand that buried 50, 100, 200 feet below the ground, there were some of the most civilized and advanced races anywhere on the continent here in the American Southwest, long before the Indians. The so-called Indians, I hate using that name, Aboriginals, whatever you prefer, it doesn't really matter. But Yeah, so we're just civilization built on civilization, built on civilization. What happened to the fossilized trees? They were harvested by mining companies. As I mentioned earlier, they were full of quartz and opals and silver and gold. And when a tree crystallizes, depending on the air outside, depending on the voltage it was hit with, and again, these things are petrified instantly. Some of them, Jen, thank you so much. Some of these trees were covered in mud and buried under hills and covered in seawater and obvious distinctive cataclysmic events. But there is a petrified forest that was standing in Arizona that hadn't been touched by anything but some kind of electrical event. All the trees were standing in their place, completely upright, with all their tiny little limbs all petrified. And the mining companies cut them all down. Like I said, they were full of exotic minerals, I mean, all rubies and all, you can imagine the entire precious gem and metals can be found in one tree. One petrified tree can contain almost every precious metal. It's absolutely insane what happens to organic life when it's exposed to high voltage. So yeah, let's hop over here. We're going to jump into this one. This one's kind of a long read. Money grows on trees. Yes, it does. Absolutely. The entire mining industry, as I've mentioned for years and years now, is based on biogeological life. They're not just digging in the mud and finding gold veins. These gold veins, the reason why if you look into mining and look into the appropriate mining terms, they're often anatomical to some kind of living organism. And that's because, like I've said, whether it's a petrified titan, a petrified animal, because again, I've just in the few series we've been doing here, I've shown that petrified animals and petrified humans can be turned into gold and silver and quartz and opals and all kinds of stuff. So you take a tree or a whale or a mammoth, again, we'll get into some stuff here where they're finding 18-foot tall llamas here in Arizona. Again, Arizona is the foundational home of the llama. The Peruvians, one of the traces of the Peruvians is to Arizona. And I would say they came from here because the skeletal record shows giant llamas. Imagine, you guys. When I lived in the country, one of my neighbors, they had Peruvian llamas that they went to Peru and got, and they had a llama farm. Incredible animals, but they were 6 feet, 6.5 feet. Now imagine an 18-foot llama, just incredible stuff. I love it. It's amazing. But yeah, so I don't even like little llamas. Little llama. Well, imagine an 18-foot llama. And listen, if a llama doesn't like you, get out of there. Okay. They're quite the characters. Llamas smell. I like farm smell. I like the smell of llamas. Every few months when there was time to trim the llamas, they sold the fur for an insane price. They actually ended up selling their entire flock, minus a few of the females and one male, to a billionaire on the East Coast. The billionaire's wife started a clothing company, hypoallergenic clothing company, that she was making all these really high-end custom clothes for babies and children from llama and alpaca fur, hair, whatever you call it. And yeah, that's completely off subject, but really important to remember because we'll touch on the fossil record here a lot as we get going. But yeah, so let's dive right into this. This is a long one, so bear with me. Wonderful ethnological discovery: Egyptian temples and ceremonies in Arizona, remnants of a prehistoric race. The New York World of Sunday has a 5-column letter from a correspondent at Santa Fe, which, if only half be true, it will set all the ethnological societies and literary bodies throughout Christendom agog with wonder and speculation. The letter purports to describe the adventures and discoveries of a certain plunky miner from the Rocky Mountains, known as Mountain Jim, who, in company with a man named Tim Jennings, started from Denver last September in search of a mining country which would yield better fortune than that to which they had been accustomed. Pushing forward day after day, meeting with constant disappointments in their hopes of finding paying loads, they at last found that they had gotten beyond the Colorado and Utah boundaries and had entered upon a country which wore so foreboding an aspect that even their Indian guides refused to accompany them further. It appears, however, that although the country furnished neither grass nor water nor living thing, save insects and reptiles, the devil-may-care spirit which frontier experience is apt to provoke still drove them forward. They had both sworn to go on until they found something, and on they went, alone, stumbling forward into a vast arid waste in which they wandered for several days. They had at last found themselves imprisoned in a desert, more malignant still. Excuse me. The upshot of it was that their mules died of starvation, and the agony of thirst drove poor Jennings mad, and that in an insane parasium he fell over a precipice and was dashed to pieces. After enduring incalculable horrors, Mountain Jim, now utterly alone and stumbling on like a man in a dream, suddenly perceived a vast black gulf that seemed to open down into the core of the earth, and while yet he stood transfixed by terror, the pulverized soil of the arid mesa sank under his feet, and he slid down 2,000 feet into a valley in the midst of the desert, 40 or 50 miles in width, enclosed in an unscalable and unbroken vertical rim. The valley was the scene of his remarkable discoveries. Omitting his description of its beauty and verdure and heads of cattle, I apologize, you can see it gets a little hard to read. We come to the point at which the real ethnological interest begins. He found that the valley abounded at intervals with massive workmanship of human hands, invariably of stone couches, stone statues, stone tanks for holding water, and huge stone roofs supported by great pillars of stone. 2 stone causeways were also lined with a succession of stone houses, extending as far as the eye could reach, none of which had any windows, while all had the expanded wings of a bird rudely chiseled over the doorway. No human being had as yet been seen by our traveler, but while engaged in the outer examination of one of these houses, a startling cry broke out. Excuse me. The cry was instantly responded to from both sides. Simultaneously, every doorway was animated with darting forms. In less than a minute, says Harvey, both ridges were thick as anthills with people. I had hardly knew what to make of the matter at first. I lifted my hat and kept on the road. The farther I went, the more fuss they made. They were the most extraordinary people. The men were half naked. The women wore brilliant blue and red tunics, hung over one shoulder and buttoned under the left arm and reaching down to their knees. The children hadn't a rag. Still, they didn't look like Indians or savages. Their complexion was a cross between Indian and mulatto. The women are wonderfully well-formed and good-looking. A great commotion ensued, but no attempts at violence, and presently, by signs, our traveler began to parley with them, the result of it all being that he walked ahead of them, followed by a number of guards, and by the whole populace for a distance of several miles. When the party halted at a massive gate, which opened and let the hunter and his escort into a vast courtyard half a mile square, surrounded by a stone wall. In the center of the court stood an edifice which excited his utmost amazement, and which his description would indicate was strongly, if not exactly, Egyptian in character. We quote, "The enormous masses of stone of which it was composed, and the majestic appearance of its construction, were such as I, whom had been a sailor and visited many American and English and Italian seaports, had not previously beheld. The front was adorned with a cornice and a frieze, covered with figures and hieroglyphics. A portico formed a 10 or 12 columns in 3 rows stood out from the front. The wings of the temple extended on each side. The shafts of the columns were covered by figures and hieroglyphics. Raised prominent among these figures was one, oft repeated, of the head of a female with cow's ears, an unmistakable resemblance to the Egyptian sculptures of the goddess Isis. The front of the doorway leading into the interior and the walls architraves of the interior were excessively embellished with figures, emblems, and hieroglyphics, some of them of such a nature that they materially assisted him in his subsequent conclusion as to the history of the people. His description of a circular tracery upon the ceiling, though not minute and exact enough to satisfy, would answer for a general description of the drawing of the zodiac. He was subsequently confined in a room as a prisoner, and thus confined for 2 weeks. His captors had, however, left untouched his revolver, which oversight was the probable means of his escape. One afternoon, to use his own language, he concluded, to shoot off his pistol and see if he couldn't wake them up. He fired twice in succession, aiming at the ugliest priest on the wall. The effect was immediate and gratifying. The ponderous stone door, swinging wide, revealed a cluster of dismayed guards. Discharging the revolver again towards the ceiling, he seized the occasion to stride boldly forth with an air and look intended to convince his persecutors that he was no longer to be trifled with. Pushing on through a long hall door, which the guards fled in terror, he passed into a vast apartment, used as a sanctuary. There, the alarm given by the guards aroused a multitude of people prostrate on the floor. Here, the spirit of deviltry induced him to fire his weapon again. The report produced fearful consternation. The crowd evidently looking upon him as a supernatural being, parted right and left before him. Everybody did him reverence. Presently a young girl, whom he supposed to be the princess, accosted him in alarm, an eloquent pantomime, entreating him to go away. With the assistance of a pencil and a thick stone slate, she explained that it was impossible to scale the barrier which surrounded the valley, but there was an uncertain river outlet to which he would be conveyed, and a barge provided to enable him to make the attempt. Arriving after 2 days' journey at the point selected and embarking in the boat furnished him, the gliding current before in a narrow and gigantic alley between the walls of naked rock which gradually enclosed him in impenetrable darkness, he felt that he was passing through a subterranean canyon. After several hours of intense suspense, during which the current changed to a rapid, and the rapid to a torrent, he reached the open light, and the close of the next day the inhabitants of the Yampas Indians at the head of the big canyon of the Colorado, from which place he found his way to Santa Fe. His theory, based partly on his own observation and partly on the little communication he had with the persons while in prison, is, the world says, to the effect that centuries ago, antedating back farther than the discovery of this continent by Columbus by many centuries, a big encampment of migrating and highly civilized race was nearly destroyed by the convulsion of an earthquake, from the worst effects of which this now charming valley, together with a favored few of the people encamped therein, were exempt. The tumult and destruction of the event lifted the world around them in cyclopean ruins, and left them isolated forever between enormous barriers of rock, surmounted by an inaccessible embankment, in the flimsy soil of which no foothold could obtain. Saved thus by a miracle, retaining the religion and numerous enough to represent the arts of their race, shut out from all intercourse with the rest of the planet, and impressed by the conviction that since no human form has ever seen, no human cry was ever heard upon the verge above them, all humanity, except themselves, had perished. They had their descendants became possessed of an unchangeable fanaticism, which, while forbidding progress, prevented retrogression by continually impelling them to hold fast to the customs which the God had sanctioned by the great traditional event. Thank you for sticking with me during that long article. What do you guys think? Ancient Egyptian city found buried 2,000 feet in a canyon. Love this article. You spend enough time talking about Arizona, and there's some great books out there. Arizona being Egypt, and some of the kind of esoteric stories about dams and the damming downrange and what kind of things were buried. Especially the Hoover Dam being one of them. And America's covered in an incredible amount of dams, and the amount of lake that's been created by these dams as often as covered cities, ancient cities all over America. The small town my family's from in Georgia, they have a lake house, and the lake is a monster, and it was made by damming 3 of the large rivers in the area. And in the 80s, they found an ancient, they called it an Indian city, but it was all made of stone. Very, very old. And I hypothesize that this is what's happened here, and especially all over. California is one of the most damned states in America, and Arizona has thousands and thousands. At these arid climates, that's how they get away with destroying a lot of land for the sake of um, not only hydroelectric power, but also for irrigation purposes. But yeah, so that was a long read. Thanks for sticking with me through that one. But yeah, one of my favorites, and I think it's really important. Forever Conscious Research Channel, thank you so much. Been following your work for quite a few years now on Twitter. It's great to see you doing more and more live streams. Thanks, man. I really appreciate it. Yeah, the YouTube thing's going pretty good. Reading long articles like that, not everyone can stick with you, but those that can, I really appreciate it. It's one of my favorite articles. I found this one years and years ago, and I wanted that to be basically the first one here because it kind of is a great synopsis of what we're dealing with and what we're looking at here in America. Do you think, like Dr. Longo, that Egypt was the U.S. prior to Egypt? There is I mean, I don't want to ever say anything for certain. There's just too many variables to history and time frames and how people date things. But it seems very likely. And this is a worldwide thing because cities like Constantinople sits on 4 buried cities, 4 different cities. There are towns in Italy, Russia. This is a worldwide thing. We're dealing with cultures that have been buried, risen again, and buried and risen again several times. But yes, I would say there's a lot of proof, and I've been piecing a lot of it together just from the Smithsonian. that the Smithsonian was stealing artifacts, not even stealing because there were no laws against it. They were doing whatever they wanted. They were stealing artifacts from Arizona, Colorado, California, New Mexico, the whole everywhere, not just the American Southwest, Oregon, Idaho, and a lot of the relics were shipped to Europe. And when you study Egypt from the 1850s to World War I, there was a lot of weird shit going on. And a lot of the mummies in Europe are American mummies. And the oldest mummies ever found are from the Americas. The most ancient corn, grain, you name it, from the Americas. Some of the oldest fossil records, Americas. And again, that's the thing I love about these articles is we're talking about, like I mentioned with the llama, but I've mentioned with the horses, the largest skeletal horse ever found was in California. And it was like 60 feet. A 60-foot tall horse, you guys. An 18-foot tall llama. Like people, not only is our dating inaccurate, carbon dating is very inaccurate. There's a lot of great work out there. So you can, you dig into that on your own. You're going to find, I'm not saying you're going to come to any certain conclusions, but you're going to go, okay, well, this isn't accurate. And then you're going to have to go, okay, so I'm just kind of left with filling in the blanks. And that's what this is about. I'm kind of using the newspapers as a medium to explore other avenues that people aren't talking about or thinking about, and it's been a blessing. It's uncovered a lot of really amazing stuff. Longo's in the chat. Longo, love you, man. Check your DMs. Hopefully we can make today work. I said today can work. So send me back a message. Longo's a great example. I had taken a long absence from YouTube after I had done about a year of the Radio Tartary show, which shout out Victor. Victor's reposting all of Radio Tartary episodes right now. So make sure to check that out. You can see 30 or more weekly episodes of mine from 3 years ago, covering a lot of newspaper stuff. But anyways, the newspapers are fantastic. And Longo, he popped in here very synchronistic because about a year or so before I had come across Longo's YouTube channel, I had become obsessed with the Gulf of Mexico. And because I had read just about every article that was posted in an American newspaper about explorations in Mexico and the Yucatan. And that had led me, of course, through Florida, Arkansas, all of the Gulf states, which are just unbelievable, just like Arizona, Florida, every Gulf state is covered in ancient canals, covered. And we're talking Venice-like stuff, the true, Italy as we know it today is based off America, the Gulf. And a really important thing to remember as we get into these Arizona articles, and I'm going to try not to ramble too much here so we can cover as much as we can. There's a town in Arizona called Florence. And we'll read an article here from right outside Florence, where they found a giant, petrified giant, or mummified giant, wearing a mitre and dressed like a Catholic priest. And he had 6 toes. And Florence, Arizona, is one of the most incredible ancient places. It had more canals than Florence in Italy. And Longo and I have been postulating that a lot of what Europe is just based off what America used to be before a destructive event. And the similarities don't end there. The reason Florence is really incredible as well is Florence is Pinal County. Pinal County in Florida, which me and Longo talked about on one of our live talks, relates directly to the Vatican. So there are so many incredible relations between America and Italy. It's going to blow your mind. We'll make sure to touch on that article here. The giant priest king found in Florence, Arizona, wearing a bishop's mitre. I would say far older than any Catholic history in Italy, without a doubt. So we'll get into that one. Maybe I'll pick that one next. Let's go find that one and do that one, huh? Since we're talking about it. Again, thank you everybody for being here. Which one was it? I think it was the one with. So bear with me here. We're going to find that exact article. Here we go. A handful of dust. It is all that remains of a prehistoric king. A valuable archaeological find in Arizona, evidently the tomb and remains of a monarch of an unknown age. Among the most valuable discoveries ever made on the American continent, from an archaeological standpoint, is the tomb of a prehistoric race recently unearthed at the village of Crittenden, Arizona, right outside Florence. The workmen had penetrated at some 8 feet below the surface of the ground what they took to be the stone of a soft, friable nature, but which was evidently masonry of very superior workmanship when they reached the tomb itself. This was composed of a large, square blocks of stone, which was identified as red or rose granite. Incredible here. You look at rose granite, shaping and cutting rose granite. Unbelievable. Okay, so they're finding an ancient tomb composed of blocks of rose granite and cemented together with such skill as to at first cause the whole measuring 12 by 15 feet to appear as a solid mass. To come across a rose granite tomb that was so well cut and cemented that it looked like one giant piece of granite. The opening of this, while very difficult at the use of powder, was prohibited by Mr. Hendrickson, who, as a learned archaeologist, was placed in charge of the examination by the authorities, was accomplished by night, when the interest and curiosity of the party was so great that the work was continued by lamplight till dawn. The tomb, when opened, was found to contain a gigantic image of a man lying at full length and made of clay mixed with a sort of preparation which gives it a bright blue color and a slight elasticity, the whole appearing to have been subjected to great heat. Now, we'll keep that in mind because we're going to get into the great heat. A lot of these buildings in Arizona were melted, it seems. The image represents the naked figure, except for a very tight girdle about the waist, a pair of close-fitting sandals, and a crown on the head shaped very much like a bishop's mitre, but topped with the head of a hawk or an eagle. So you got the Egyptian eagle on top of the bishop's mitre. Now, you do enough cross-referencing with Catholicism, and it's going to lead you to Hermes, and that's going to lead you to Thoth, and you're going to see a lot of very, very amazing blendings in iconography and clothing. And I love this because it's like the middle ground. The features are roughly molded out of an imperious cast and of a man in middle age with a prominent nose and a very wide mouth, but with cheekbones so low as to preclude all idea that the original could have been an Indian. The hands, which are as small as a woman's and bear on the backs the head of the bird as on the crown, are crossed on the breast and hold an image about 3 inches long of a squatting figure, probably that of a god. The feet are also crossed, the right presenting the peculiarity of possessing a sixth toe, which the sandal is cut to bring into prominence, as if the owner had prided himself on it. Now, the sixth digits is really important. Now, they're saying that this person cut his sandal and had his sixth toe shown as prominence. Probably that his genetic relation shows that he comes from the six-fingered and six-toe priest kings or giants. If you haven't looked into that on your own, I probably won't be touching on that in any of these series here. But if you haven't heard it, go look into it. I have a lot of articles on my Twitter if you want to find six-toed giants, double rows of teeth. It goes on and on. The hair of the image is dressed in thick curls on both sides of the head, reaching to the shoulders and brought down to the brow of the forehead. Careful examination of this clay figure revealed that it was merely the elaborate coffin of the real body and could be opened from the back. This was done with all possible care so as to not disturb the remains within, but a few handfuls of dust, dark brown and almost impalpable powder, was all that was found. The crown is of thick red gold, carved with minute but well executed drawings representing battle scenes, triumphal marches, and other pictures, the meaning of which is somewhat misty. But in all, the principal figure is that of a man with 6 toes on his right foot. The workmanship of the whole crown is very fine. The bird's head on top is a masterpiece worthy of Cellini. It holds in its mouth a magnificent chalchutis, or green diamond, valued by the Aztecs, which shows some attempts at lapidification. The girdle found is composed of plates of gold arranged like scales and very thin, so as to give with every movement of the wearer's body. On each of these plates, which is in the shape of a half ellipse, is engraved a figure or hieroglyphics conveying, however, no hint to their meaning and form. The image of what is presumably a god is made of clay combined with the preparation spoken of before and also burnt till thoroughly hardened. It represents a male being seated on a pedestal in a squatting posture, its eyes squinting and grinning in hideous mirth, while both hands are placed over the ears as if to shut out sound. Now, that's an important image. Think about that, guys. A squatting figure, eyes closed, hands over the ears. A peculiar thing about this image is that its hair is represented as hanging down its back in one long plait like a Chinaman's. The Q. This hair figure, I've talked a lot about over the years. Really important. You find it all over from Alaska to the Peruvians. Yeah, the Q. Look into that, you guys. It's a rabbit hole. It leads you all over the world. The figure is hollow, but contained only a dozen small black pebbles, highly polished, and a somewhat larger stone of a dull gray hue. The coffin and these relics are to be donated to the State Museum of History and Archaeology at Tucson. No clue of any value as to what race the remains are to be ascribed can be found, but it is probable that it was one antedating the Atzlan and even the mound builders, and superior to both in knowledge of masonry, sculpture, and the working of metal. So, again, really amazing. One of my favorites. Why I love Arizona so much. Yeah. So you got a 6-digit. He's a giant in these eras. You know, he's like, you know, mid sixes in height, in a kind of sarcophagus. Incredible ornamentation. A tomb like we would struggle to build today, but found buried in the ground. You know, buried. You know, 30 feet below ground. Yeah, the bishop's mitre with the eagle on the Egyptian style eagle and snake. Yeah, a long braid, the Q. And as we get through more of these articles, there's tons and tons more. They find Chinese hieroglyphics. They find all kinds of sculptures that don't make any sense. And since we're on the subject of China, we're going to hop into this article next. I kind of wanted to see if anyone had anything specific to say. I want to draw this giant and all his gold. I mean, just imagine, And again, if you don't follow me on Twitter, you should. If you don't have Twitter, you should get it so you can go through these all on your own. And you can dig on them if you want to. If you want to look into them some more, if you want to reread them, share them with people you know, you should definitely do so. I have a thread. It's on the main part of my channel. It's stated as thread for the show. Easy to find. And it has everything I'm reading from. And since we mentioned the hairstyle, the Q, that's going to lead us into this next article. Casa Grande Ruins, Arizona, 1893. Here's the AI. I put what's in the article, and it created this. Pretty cool. Here's a really cool image of Casa Grande. It does not look anything like this now. They've removed all the brick, but the outer part of Casa Grande was all brick. So you have really old, what seems to be a type of cement with an outer facade of brick. So whether the brick was added after, I doubt. This building was melted. 100% hit by a tidal wave and melted. The language barrier scattered throughout the earth. Amazing sight to behold. Tons of Buddhists. Yep. The squatting figure, you're going to find that all the time. And in Buddhist iconography, that's why I was mentioning the eyes closed. Everyone knows the monkey see, monkey do, or the no hear, no see. I see, I speak, I hear no evil. That's has a lot of overlays with Buddhists. I've talked endlessly about the squatting man. I've talked endlessly about Buddhist iconography found all over the American Southwest, all over the Mississippi Valley, Mexico, all over South America. Again, Guatemala, which was considered one of the original Meccas of the world. It's pretty endless. Yeah. Just kind of want to look at chat a little bit before I move on. It's already 6. Holy smokes. Jeez Louise. This is going to be a tough one. Like, we could do a 3-part series just like California. And, if there's enough people asking me to, maybe after this series is a little farther along, I'll go back and I'll do 2-parters. There is a rose granite mine here in Connecticut, I believe, from what I remember Ben mentioning. Yeah, rose granite, incredibly rare, hard to shape, hard to cut. So to find a rose granite tomb that was cut so perfectly it looked like one giant block of granite, unbelievable in its own. Even if there wasn't this incredible sarcophagus tomb found within, that alone is insane. Buried in the deserts of Arizona, you find this red granite tomb. I mean, all the other details just really make it stand out. But yeah, okay, so that's good. We'll hop into the article. Casa Grande Ruins. A writer in the Native American who recently visited the interesting ruins of Casa Grande says, "The ruins, which are roofless at the present time and 3 stories high, were when discovered by the Spaniards 7 stories and covered by a fine cedar roof, which was burned at the time of the Apache invasion. At the time of the building of the structure, cedar may have been grown in the vicinity, although now there is none nearer than 100 miles. There is no doubt but what they are in the ruins of a citadel, which was the center of the city, containing a population fully of 500,000 people. A research society sent out from Washington a few years since, Smithsonian, is excavating, found 2 drinking vessels modeled in the fashion of a Chinese rattlesnake. This raised the question whether the people who inhabited this city were not of Chinese origin. The walls were built in 4-foot cubic blocks, in the manner in which the Mexican of today uses the adovera blocks being built and dried upon the preceding one. In the center of the citadel are 2 cells, and the walls are loopholes, which indicate the nature and use of the building." So, looking into that a little bit more, it would seem like that they were hanging bells from this citadel. It's kind of hard to find, but the loopholes in the construction with the walls, it seems that they had probably a very large rope with bells hanging that they would ring. There are other and lesser ruins nearby. East of the ruins is a reservoir which had a cemented bottom, the cement still being in a state of preservation, and was connected by a canal with the Gila River 40 miles away. Okay, you guys, this city was burnt to the ground, melted, not burnt by a fire. And the future articles will help continue this example. 3 stories of this building are missing, and they're buried. They weren't knocked over. Maybe some of them. But as we get into more of these, you're going to find 3, 4, 5, 6 stories of buildings go underground. Continue underground. 40-mile canal, population of 500,000 people. This is all that's left. Used to be a 7-story building. Joaquin Miller, in an article in the New York Independent, says, in the second place, Casa Grande is an old ruin, a very old ruin. Many men will calmly assert and assure you over and over again that this is but the relic of a temporary occupation by the Spaniards. Okay? This is the narrative they were spinning. Oh, the Spaniards built this. Absolutely ridiculous. Because in their own books, and maybe we'll touch on the article here, but an author went to Mexico City and went through their library and he found an actual copy of one of the narratives written by an Spanish explorer. And the things he's describing is that the most advanced cities they'd ever seen were alive and well. Some were in ruin, some were still inhabited. And that was all over Southern California, Arizona, New Mexico, Utah. Where was I? Many men will assert that they were Spanish. 7 cities of the bowl. So everyone's heard of this Cibola, 7 cities of the bowl, which the truth is Alvar Nunez Cabaza de Vaca visited the ruins of Casa Grande about the year 1538. A detailed account of his discovery of these ruins I have myself read, so this is perfect. Didn't even know that that's where we were going. How perfect is that? So the author of this is the one who went to Mexico and read the whole thing. And the antiquity of these and other ruins in this region make up a very important fact in the testimony of the case, which I should like to present to the world in this brief paper. Let this then be well settled in your mind that these ruins of Arizona, or Arizona, I love that, Arizona, as the Spaniards called this region of the Gila, are old, older than history, as old, maybe as the oldest ruins on the Nile of Egypt. This region then, once densely populated, no allurements of gold, no lust of conquest, nothing at all but the generous soil and the genial climate built up a city here. Many cities indeed, up and down the land. There must have rivaled in splendor and extent the storied cities of the Nile of old. So yeah, this area is covered in thousands of miles of canals, thousands and thousands. If then the simple, primitive, and half-civilized people of the dead past made a garden of this land, where the world has always insisted and insisted now on locating a desert, can we not do something with our plows, our ditches, our dozens of improved methods? Let us try and get down to the facts of this contradiction and see who is at fault. Let us see whether it is the land, the climate, or the people themselves. Love that. Obviously, where I've been going with a lot of this, that it was indeed older than Nineveh, Egypt, all of these places. Man, there's just so many, and we're getting low on time. I want to read the one about the Masonic tomb. This is a short one, so we'll read this one. Many regard the Southwest as a new country, and they look for new things when visiting the far southwestern land. But in reality, the territory teemed with an active population versed in sciences, the art of government, and the knowledge of manufacturing, centuries before Milton and Shakespeare and Cervantes and Columbus were born, centuries. It is possible indeed and quite probable that Arizona was a progressive and populous region when Noah built his ark, when the Battle of Thermopylae was fought, when Homer wrote his epics. In fact, it is an old country, rich with a history that may never be known, sacked and pillaged, neglected and forgotten during the years in which the East grew up. Ancient. The East was an infant when Arizona was neglected and pillaged, desolate already when the East was growing. Perfect little synopsis for this show, I think. The crystal, that's a good one. I like this. This one I love this one, so we'll read this one. A great cavern lodge. Arizona Masons meet in a mammoth cave. Return to the first principles of the ancient order as exemplified at Solomon's Temple. In the written lore of Masonry, it is told that the order and its birth in the cave quarries beneath Mount Lebanon, where the workmen of Solomon's Temple gathered at night and bound themselves of brotherhood, united in the triple cause of mutual protection, learning, and truth. In the early days of the guild, through the persecution that ever is allotted a cult that is new, the caves of Syria were the lodge rooms. But the days when Masonry was deemed allied to the black arts are past, and not for centuries have the craftsmen of the order been compelled to hide their lodges like the foxes. In Arizona, there is a return to the first principles, for the annual sessions of the Grand Lodges of the territory will be held in a cavern, not in a dismal quarry, rough strewn with the products of the chisel and the mallet, but in a temple of surpassing beauty, a direct gift from the Supreme Master, unmarred by touch of human workmen. Large it is as the largest lodge room, with fluted and frescoed roof, with wonderful columns and pillars such as mortal could never hew. The walls, the spotless white of purity, with here and there a stripe of blue of the earth. At the master's right hand, nature has placed a pedestal of creamy white that will ring like a bell under his gavel. On either side of the dais are snowy curtains of purest lime, through which the lights will shine, only mellowed by the barrier. Though the lodge room is 300 feet below the surface, it yet will be reached from below, and well guarded it may be, for the approach for rods is by narrow tunnel. Then the way leads up a short shaft and through a portal broken in the cavern's side. At the back beyond the master's station is another gateway, but one that only adds to the mystic influence of the place. Outlet it is, yet no man knoweth whither it leads. Though the cavern's air is sweet and pure, no draught comes from its Stygian pit. No man has ever been lowered into its mouth, and the lanterns swung down show nothing beyond the narrow slit. 6 feet in width, of unknown length and depth, stones thrown within are never heard to strike the bottom. Such is the reward boundary of the lodge room. The location is at Bisbee, one of the most unromantic of mining towns, set in a gorge of the Mule Mountains in the southeastern part of Arizona. Down the narrow valley, so I'm just going to, all that goes on is to talk about kind of silly things in the town that I don't really have time to cover, but you get the idea. So the AI created this image. It's basically the most incredible crystal, room of crystal. Lime crystal stalactites 300 feet below the surface, and that's where the Masons have their lodge room meetings now. Bisbee, Arizona, just awesome. Love that. It's incredible. Flat floor. I mean, and then at the back of the room, 300-foot square room, there's a pit that has no bottom. They've never sounded. I just kind of want to keep this together, and I wanted to read this one afterwards. I should have read this one. We were talking about the Chinese. Arizona Antiquities, Arizona, 1891. Ruins of temple 10,000 years old found near Yuma. An interesting discovery of the ruins of a prehistoric city has just been made on the Colorado Desert near Yuma. The wind has laid bare the walls and remains of stone buildings for a distance of 420 feet in length by 260 feet in width. Gigantic pillars, quaintly carved to represent dragons' heads and rattlesnakes, still stand in the sands of the desert, supporting on their tops huge slabs of granite weighing many tons. The frieze ornamentation resembled Egyptian sculpture and exhibited a great degree of skill than is possessed by the Indian artisans of the present day. Fragments of pottery were found underneath the debris. The southwestern corner of the United States offers a most interesting field to archaeologists, which has scantily yet been touched. In Arizona, there may be found some of the oldest ruins in the world. According to Mr. Cushing, who has spent some months in investigating them, there are more than 10,000 years old. Although, of course, this is to a great extent guesswork. Yeah, exactly. It is guesswork, but it's incredibly ancient. And there, imagine how deep down this temple goes, because, I'll finish off with some of the stuff that's really, really deep. Just to give you an idea, we're talking, these buildings go 100 feet down. The remains of great canals and reservoirs can be plainly traced for many miles. So accurately were these works constructed that in many cases modern engineers have utilized canals without changing the grade in the least. Just think about that. How old and perfect were these canals made? And if you didn't see my preview, you should go back and watch it. Really incredible. Some of these canals were burnt. So going back to the Chinese relation again, and the dragon's heads and the Chinese rattlesnakes and the pottery that resembled Chinese pottery, and the hair of the giant six-toed man wearing the bishop's mitre and the Egyptian snake, all this cross-platform iconography here. You're seeing very similar things here. The canals were all constructed in a form like terracotta. I'm sure some of you are familiar, but that is a form that was perfected in China, in the East. And all the canals were laid with cobblestone, and the clay was burnt to a absolutely perfect terracotta-like consistency. So you're dealing with construction that is insanely advanced, as we touched on with the rose granite tomb that was so perfect it looked like one giant block. Canals that are maybe 10,000 years or older that are still so perfect they can use them, and they're using them today. They were using them in Phoenix. They were digging them out in Phoenix in the 1800s. Just digging them out. No, this is great. We don't need to change this. These are perfect. Thousands of miles of these canals are so perfect they're still used. Yes, the rivers and canals here too, even mentioned in a local history book. Yeah, and it's thousands of miles. I mean, you saw the one I mentioned at Casa Grande. Just that one, just to feed that one city, was a 40-mile canal. And this is everywhere. Hundreds and hundreds of cities, millions of occupants. I mean, and can you imagine what this looked like? I mean, this is your Babylon and your Nineveh. This is your terraced gardens. This is your merchants traveling on boats on these beautiful canals. This place, just picture it. For hundreds of miles, millions of people traveling on these canals. I mean, this place looked unbelievable. Unbelievable. The origin of these remarkable works is and must apparently remain wrapped in mystery. The present Indian inhabitants of the territory have no definite tradition in regard to the race of people who constructed them. though there is a vague tradition that the builders were driven north by the incursions of a race of warlike people from the south. Some believe that the cliff dwellers of northeastern Arizona and New Mexico, about whom many interesting articles have recently been written, are the descendants of the ancient people who thousands of years ago made the arid mesas of Arizona blossoms as the rose. Arizona should receive more attention than it has from American antiquaries. There are many curious works there, the reason for the existence of which nobody has yet been able to explain. In the mountains near Tucson is a perfectly preserved hut built entirely of large seashells, which must have been brought from hundreds of miles from the Gulf of California. No one has been able to offer an explanation of how or why these shells were carried such a long distance, or what mysterious race of people went to so much trouble. A careful investigation of these remains in our neighboring territory might throw some light upon the vexed of the origin of the population of the North American continent. So yeah, here's what AI gave when I put dragon head column. Just pretty cool. And then a hut made of seashells. But still, I mean, imagine, this just like kind of gives a little more credence to California being an island and bringing that Gulf of California or the quite a bit closer to this region. Seems very likely. Again, there are parts of Arizona that have been hit by tidal waves, very, very large ones. And, not to mention incredible lava flows. People don't quite understand that there are lava flows covering large parts of Arizona that are hundreds of feet deep. I mean, imagine what lies beneath them. Now in Oregon and in California, we've shown that 200, 300, 400 feet below lava flows, they find ancient cities. They found one in Oregon that had Phoenician iconography and Chinese. Again, we're talking about the same groups of people here, you guys. We're talking about Solomon. The oldest masonry, the oldest iconography of masonry is from the Americas. Was King Solomon's Ophir here in America? It definitely seems probable. I'd even go as far as to say that perhaps Solomon's temple was built here. So now that I transitioned that, we're going to cross over to segue. What was it? Is it all the way at the bottom? Yep. Prehistoric Masonry, Arizona, 1896. Relics that have been unearthed, engraved with Masonic emblems. That masonry is of ancient origin, there can be no doubt. But history does not state that masonry existed among the Aztecs or the Toltecs, the prehistoric tribes that thousands of years in the dim past flourished in Arizona. It is true that scientists have been able to collect but little knowledge of these extinct tribes, for the only reliable evidence of the prehistoric existence of the races buried in the oblivion of ages are the relics from time to time have been unearthed in these mounds. Strewn over the valley and territory, these ruins in themselves are indisputable in proving that at one time a tribe of a fair degree of intelligence inhabited the country. We know it's far beyond that. It's incredibly advanced. Mining, engineering, arts, government, everything. Grecian. But the reason of the total destruction of the tribes is purely guesswork. It was many things. Many things. There was a destruction by fire. There was a destruction by water. There was a flood. There was a petrifaction event, an electrical event. Many things. Several earthquakes. They could all be tied into one event. Who knows? The length of time that the race inhabited the country, of course, is unknown, and can only be supposition at the most that the people always lived here. Exactly. The people always lived here, or were a nomadic tribe that settled here. the latter being very probable. We already know. This is an older article. As we get into the 1920s, they're digging 40, 100 feet below ground and finding older and older and more advanced building. So the buildings get more advanced. These people were always here. 17 years ago, Bud Cummings of Tempe, another gentleman, made a partial excavation of one of the numerous mounds that the city were greatly surprised when they unearthed a seashell on which was worked in perfect relief a square and compass. Now, you already know the geometry that exists in a seashell and how it already is kind of a perfect example of God's harmony, God's, geometric works, how he ascribes in the physical, bringing from the spiritual realm into the physical realm, and geometry is a big part of that. A seashell is just like a perfect artistic representation of that transition between the two worlds. So wouldn't it be the perfect form to put a square and compass on? The shell had evidently been worn as a charm around the neck, as a hole was through the shell. So think about that. You see Masons today, often it's a ring, but you see some pendants. Imagine 10,000 years ago, the ancient Masonry, they wore a seashell with the square and compass carved onto the seashell around their necks. It's beautiful. The relic was subsequently presented to Dr. Thibodeau, formerly of this city, who prizes it very highly. John Tate, superintendent of the orange orchard, is greatly interested in prehistoric relics and is always seeking to add to his collection. About a year ago, he was in the Indian village east of the city for the purpose of collecting relics from the Indians. He met a squaw, and after hard work was made, her understand of what he was seeking, she entered her habitation and from the ground dug up an old olla filled with ornaments, both prehistoric and the handiwork of their tribe. The ornaments were attached to a string, and in looking them over, Mr. Tate's attention was riveted on a small charm of red sandstone, on which was plainly engraved the square and compass. He purchased the relic, and it is the most valuable of his collection. A prominent Mason, a sort, while ago, offered him a fabulous price for the emblem, but he would not part with it. Fantastic. There are so many more like this. The oldest, most ancient methods of etching ever found were on shells in Arizona, long before Europe. And I go as far as to say that I would assume that many of these shells were etched with square and compasses as well. Excuse me. For the last few minutes here, I'm going to talk about what lies beneath a few cities. I'm not going to be able to get into all the articles, which is really a bummer. This shows you, I have, again, 8,000 posts. I have over 11 years in May, so a month away from 11 years of posting on Twitter. Unbelievable amounts of work there. Let's see. Let's pick 3 to go over. Gosh, that's hard to do. The mound one I wanted to get into. So unlike the Mississippi Valley, where many of the mounds are burial mounds, out here in Arizona, almost all the mounds are cities. Really incredible. The mounds are cities. A lot of their priests were, as we've seen here, the priests and the kings, their bodies were kept whole. Most of the other people, they were burnt and put in jars. And the priests and the kings will be buried in the top part of these temples. But most of the mounds, and there are thousands, and there aren't anymore, there were thousands, were cities, were giant buildings covered in sand. So the mounds, and I postulated that many of the Mississippi Valley mounds are the same thing, buried buildings with gigantic underground subterranean worlds below them. And I would say the same in Arizona. They found the mounds connected to many of the cave systems. Arizona has hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of miles of caves, just like every state we go into. Every state sits upon another buried civilization with thousands and thousands of miles of caves. A prehistoric Arizona, Montana, 1881. Right where Prescott stands is the site of an ancient city. This is Prescott, Arizona. It's a beautiful place. I've been all over Arizona. My grandmother lived in Sedona for many, many years. Spent a lot of time in Phoenix, Tucson. My aunt lives just outside Flagstaff. Incredible place. Prescott's beautiful. Geometric layout of the city is incredible. Here's the AI that was created from the terms we're about to read. I just love this, just so cool. Prehistoric Arizona. Right where Prescott now stands can be traced the walls of an ancient city. And if we are to judge from the wearing down of mountains and the coverings of earth that has almost hidden the buildings from being traced, we should say that many thousands of years have passed and gone. Excuse me. Many thousands of years have passed and gone since the people who once inhabited a prosperous city where now stands Prescott, the most beautiful village in Arizona, took their departure or became extinct. That a large and flourishing city once existed here, there can be no doubt, as the evidences are proof positive and deny contradiction. Very often relics are taken from excavations of great depth, and we are inclined to believe that the former inhabitants of Arizona were a curious but somewhat civilized race. Again, we're dealing with an incredibly advanced race. Again, the geologist and the antiquarian have a rich field for study in Arizona. For go where you may, you are continually treading the homes and graves of a race of whom nothing is known other than they lived in houses, had large buildings of worship. Sand and time and cataclysm after cataclysm have buried all of these places. And I would go as far as to say, I have articles that say Flagstaff built on ancient city, Phoenix built on ancient city, Prescott built on ancient city. This is the same with California. If you haven't seen California episode 4, please go back and watch it. One of my favorites. Almost every California major city is built on top of an ancient city. It's incredible. So since we said this one, we'll go up to the Arizona Phoenix one. Phoenix being buried. Phoenix sits on top of a buried city. Arizona Mound yields ancient Indian relics. Arizona Mound yields in Phoenix, Arizona, a prehistoric ruin was unearthed recently. The revelation tended to substantiate the legend that Phoenix is built over the site of an ancient Indian city. Again, it's not an Indian city. It's a far more advanced race of people that perhaps traces its roots back 25,000 years or more. The fact that the structure unearthed proved to be a 4-story masonry stone building. 4-story masonry stone building found below ground in Phoenix. Phoenix, Arizona. I mean, think about what happened to bury a 4-story building. And I'm sure, again, they were finding cut bricks at 300 feet in certain parts of Arizona. Perfectly shaped bricks found 200 to 300 feet below ground in Arizona. The mound has been used formerly as a runway for cyclists. Funeral urns, cooking pottery, and even traces of cooking fires were uncovered. And some of the pottery, of exquisite design and color, is valued at $1,000. Again, they are finding, quote, Greek pottery all over Arizona, cooked in the same manner. And then they're finding terracotta style, the same methods. All the canals in Arizona are in a terracotta consistency with millions, if not billions, of cobblestones. Several skeletons were also unearthed, and one grave revealed a man and a woman, while another held the skeleton of a 9-year-old girl. The mound, as it is called by the citizens of Phoenix, will be opened as a public museum. All right, we're almost out of time. I'm just going to read some of these titles here so you guys can be interested to go back and read the thread. An artificial metropolis. Excavations of mounds in Arizona, unveiling the ruins of many ancient cities. One metropolis traced for 3 or 4 miles. 40 or 50 huge structures. Houses big enough for 300 to 400 people each. In a large structure, bodies of aged men were found. So again, the priestly or kingly people, the bodies are kept. The rest of the people are in funeral urns, jars. Underground Village, Montana, 1884. Again, so that's just the paper. This is printed in a Montana newspaper, just in case anyone's confused by this. Explorations in Arizona came across an underground village of 65 dwellings near the summit of the volcanic foothills San Juan region, occupied 2,000 years ago. So below ground on a volcano, they found 65 dwellings. Find a Berry City, North Carolina, 1892. Laborers digging extensions to Santa Cruz Canal, Arizona, come upon old Aztec city 20 feet below the surface. Wonderfully preserved, triangular building, 300 feet by 200 feet. 18 bodies were found, mummified. Prehistoric Arizona, South Dakota, 1884. Excavation 2 miles east of Phoenix. A dwelling stories high of unknown age. A thigh bone 19 inches long. Huge. Superior physically. Crucibles, furnaces, children's toys. A seashell inlaid with stones. A handprint twice the size of present day. Find mummified dogs in Arizona. Mummified dogs found buried beside the bodies of ancient residents. 2500 BC is the date they gave it. Again, the dates I take as a grain of sand, but still very, very old. An Arizona cavern, Connecticut, 1913. One of the most wonderful caves in the world. Its grandeur, a wonderful work of nature, spent days within and never found the end. Transparent stalactite columns, level and smooth floor, hallways, windows, skeletons, beads, and pottery. This is the preview article I read. So if you haven't seen the preview, this is the article I covered. This article alone is worth your time. It's a 20-minute video. It's a huge article. Incredible. One of the best synopsises of what lies beneath Arizona's feet. A gruesome find, Arizona, 1901. 400 skeletons found in an Arizona cave. Remains of cliff dwellers unearthed in the White Mountains. Strange story of suffocation of an entire village of cliff dwellers 4,000 years ago. 4+ miles of passages and corridors. Many inhabitants. They found a city inside of a cliff with 4 miles of passages, and they found 400 skeletons they believe were suffocated by a rival tribe. 4,000 years old, they estimated the date. Arizona Antiquities, Tennessee, 1881. A large mound down to 10 feet of stone implements, utensils, a peculiar material painted on the inside with Egyptian characters. Ornaments of shell, again, shells. They're ornamented with gems, with jewels. They have the compass and the square carved on them. They have a hut made entirely out of shells. Tombs, 3 tiers deep. Paintings of camels and mastodons. These people walked with these animals, and there's camels. The origin of the camel is in America, nowhere else. The camels left America and ended up in the East. This is one I really wanted to touch on, but we're out of time. Discovery in the Mountains, Kansas, 1874. I'm just going to read it because this one's great. The president minor of Arizona gives the following particulars of the recent discovery of a cavern in the Aquarius Mountains in the territory. John McCurdale, a prospector, came in the other day and reported a most wonderful discovery in the Aquarians Mountains. We give his story, believing it to be true. He has been about 40 days, starting in at a point about 25 miles from this place, and in passing upon a canyon, he noticed the formation as being peculiar and showing signs of recent travel. On his return through the same canyon, he found a fresh, living spring running down the middle of the gorge, which had evidently been opened by the shock of an earthquake or by the heavy rains bursting from underground. On following the spring to its source, he found a fissure in the rock, out of which the stream seemed to come. Providing himself with torches, he forced himself through the fissure, wading the stream for 100 yards. When he came to an immense cave or cavern, here he found old mining relics, such as picks, shovels, etc., made out of stone and copper. On one side, he found what he considered to be tombstones with numerous tablets and hieroglyphic pictures and writings. One of these tablets, made of copper, he tore off and brought with him. It bears the inscription, Sit tibi terra lephis, and in one place he found a stone box, which he broke open and found some very ancient coins. On some of them, the word peso can be plainly made out. Another tablet found on the hard granite wall bears the inscription Zutza Imra Nuros. He also found a scabbard, richly embroidered and having a coat of arms of solid gold set with precious stones. The place bore evident traces of many persons having lived there at some previous time, and that they excelled in mining, and some art is beyond a doubt. He also carried away other invaluable relics, which he declines to exhibit. He goes to San Francisco immediately, where he will exhibit the curiosity and make arrangements to come back soon and thoroughly explore the entire cave and the mountains in the vicinity. It is in the opinion here that there is immense wealth buried somewhere in the cave. Many men are fitting out to make a search of the cave themselves. McCurdale feels safe in holding the secret. His story has created quite an excitement among those whom he told it and exhibited his specimens. So here I go and I show one of these coins. These coins are ancient. So the coins are talking about Grecian, European Grecian coins. Here's what this description is. The thing he's talking about, the copper tombstone. In Latin inscription of funerary items in ancient Roman times. Ancient Romans, you guys. Here in Arizona. The English translation may be, may the earth rest lightly on you, or may the ground be light to you. A more literal translation may be to you ground soil, light. The origin of the phrase can be found in the Euripides Alcetus, the phrase in Greek. So incredible. They found Grecian swords. They found all kinds of Grecian weapons, Grecian helmets. And again, they found this all from Alaska all the way down through Mexico. So what lies beneath? Mummies found, prehistoric royalty. No mummies have ever been found within 100 miles of this. A chamber within solid granite, sealed cement-like substance, smell of rosin and balsam. The bodies laid there for 500 to 700 years. The girl 5 years of age. Yeah, so 650, little over time, but I didn't cover everything. So please, if you don't already follow me, do it now. You can see the articles and read them all at your leisure. And you can search my archive. You can see it here. Click on, you gotta go to here. Then why is it going to that? Why is it doing that? Home. That's annoying. Didn't mean to click that. Anyways, you can see my thread on my main page. It's right here, and it'll lead you to all of my articles, which you can just scroll forever and just see Arizona articles. And I didn't even post all of them. Here's a pretty cool one. It's called Boston Butte, Arizona. They found all these glyphs on this butte. It's a giant mound. Who knows what lies beneath it? I guarantee you a city. And it's covered in all these different glyphs that, as the author said, look just like those of the tablets of Chaldea. So, yeah. Thank you, everybody, for being here. It means a lot to me. Make sure if you want to see or me to touch on different things in the coming episodes, what it is you like me, what else you'd like me to cover. Arizona is a little more focused on buried things just because that's the predominancy of it all. And that's what the Southwest is going to be a lot of. That's our buried history. That's kind of my niche. But yeah, so, and pay attention. I'll be posting the poll on Twitter and on YouTube for choosing between Nevada and Utah, what state we do next week. And if you have any cool things you have come across in either of those states, don't hesitate to share them with me. And yeah, thank you so much for being here for episode 5, Arizona. Yeah. Thank you again, guys, and I'll see you all next week. Have a wonderful day. Thanks again, guys. Love you.